So this brings us to 1939. This is the rough date, approximate date of this dress. And if you can see, as I waft it, it's a rather pretty little summer's dress, the sort of thing that I would appreciate today. It's very hot in England right now. And it's a very light apple green crepe with a lovely floral pattern. And it actually tells us a lot. You see, I don't know who made this. I don't know who wore it. But as a clothes historian, you can look at the details and understand that this garment has been made with thrift in mind, economy in mind. Very narrow seams, very small rolled hem, very meager embellishment. And this is definitely in keeping with the German economy in 1939, where all resources are being diverted for militarization and invasion, and civilians are having to make do with what's left. So, all right, you maybe feel sorry for civilians. You know, they're going to have rationing, there are going to be a lot of restrictions, a lot of making do. But I don't feel at all sorry for whoever bought this dress, because inside, if you can see, there is the ADEFA label again. This is one of those dresses that has not been made by Jewish hands. So it's so pretty and so hideous at the same time. So clothes do have stories.
My book, Holocaust Fighters, Boxers, Resistors, and Avengers, grew out of my interest in Jewish boxing. And while I was researching my book on Jewish boxers, I came across the boxers who had to fight for their lives in Nazi concentration camps. And it was a terrible and in some ways depressing thing to find out about. And yet these people were marvelous to the extent that they had such a strong survival instinct. They were able to keep going regardless of what terrible things were happening to them. And I profiled 5 of these boxers in my book. And the first one whom I profiled was a man named Victor Perez, known as Victor Young Perez. He was a Jew from Tunis and became the youngest European flyweight boxing champion. He became so successful that he became a celebrity in pre-war France and became the lover of a major French movie star at that time named Morale Balin.
So this poem is by Myra Fox, and she was going to be one of the editors or co-editors with us of our book, but died of cancer within several months, about 4 years ago. And it's called, this poem is It Essential? I wake in the night and curse yet one more time that what my own mom told me is true. Once you're a mother, the worry never ceases. But my son lives in a liberal paradise, a city of beauty and of tolerance. He is working long hours, enjoying praise for his creativity and skills, arriving home tired, enjoying time in the company of friends, and he is so happy, it seems. He gets bits of information from friends and coworkers, no time to read the newspaper between jobs, no time to focus on the madness. And I wonder, is it truly essential that he recognize the trouble we're in? That he too lay terrified in the night? That he worry about who will next be impoverished, imprisoned, openly mocked and hated, deprived of the most basic human rights, exterminated? He has already listened to the stories his grandparents have shared, and he already heard my retellings. Ghettos, concentration camps, hunger, torture, loss. He knows why our family's so small. So please, can't I instead remind him of the lullabies I sang to soothe him to sleep. Remind him of Rosinski's Mit Madeleine Dam Aleph Base. Is it essential? Is it truly essential? I mourn the reality that the unlikely miracle of my parents' survival, that the unlikely birth of my sister, brother, and myself make it so.
But today we're here to talk about our new solar energy project and about the museum being a little bit more green and more sustainable through your support. What's remarkable about this project, and I don't know if everybody knows this, is that Steve and Irene came to us. We didn't solicit them, we didn't ask for this. They came to us because they love our mission, they support our work, and they wanted us to be not only more sustainable, but to provide a really great opportunity and service to the museum. So thank you. And this isn't a small fee for building this size. We're not the biggest museum in St. Pete, but it is a tremendous gift. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but it was a gift of $100,000. So that's pretty fantastic. So I know we're a small group, but I'd still like to. Steve pointed out that in 9 years, it'll pretty much pay for itself. And then we have to remember that after it's paid for itself, we benefit from it for years and years to come. So it's pretty amazing. And just to give you some stats, so far, since it's been installed and activated, we have produced almost 44 megawatt hours and saved more than 65,000 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions. And we've saved 512 trees. So that's pretty cool. So now I'm going to ask Irene and Steve to say a few words about why this is so important to them and to symbolically flip the switch on our new solar energy system.
Well, first of all, we'd like to thank the board of the museum for allowing us to make this gift. As Erin said, it's the gift that keeps on giving. We're good stewards of our environment by doing this. This will allow precious funds to be used for the museum, for your mission. It'll keep on allowing us to be good stewards of our environment with renewable energy. And once again, thank you. And I'd like to thank committee members, Josh and Ron and Judah, who run the solar project. They put a lot of hard work into this, and it's been a great success, and let the sun shine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. As he said, I'm Linda Cheney. I'm state representative for House District 61, which is primarily the beaches and parts of St. Petersburg. Before you hear from me in my remarks, Senator Boyd, my sponsor of this bill, or our sponsor of this bill in the Senate, would like me to share some remarks with you. As the Senate sponsor of the Florida Holocaust Museum appropriation, I am delighted to have had a hand in securing the funds to ensure visitors from the local and global community will be enriched by the museum. The Florida Holocaust Museum has curated a unique and crucial collection of photos, letters, art, and artifacts to edify the visitors. The importance of honoring the memory of those who suffered or died in the Holocaust, and teaching the inherent worth and dignity of human life is so important to all of us. Education is key to preventing such a genocide from ever happening again. I want to take this opportunity to thank my co-sponsor and House Representative Linda Cheney, my Senate colleagues, and Senate President Wilton Simpson for their support of funding this request. And And I echo what Senator Boyd said, and I too am very honored to have secured funds to fill the needs of the Holocaust Museum, especially for the children's education area. The Florida legislature and Governor DeSantis recognize the importance of educating our children about history, and I would like to highlight two bills specifically. HB 395 requires children in Florida be taught about communism and proclaims November 7th as Victims of Communism Day. And HB 1213 requires teaching about the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and designates a Holocaust Education Week in Florida. We believe the education required by these bills will prevent an atrocity like the Holocaust from ever happening again. We commemorated these bills by hosting an actual boxcar from the Holocaust at the Capitol. It was very moving for the legislature to stand in that boxcar. I've had the privilege of visiting the Holocaust Museum in Israel, and I have to say this community is incredibly blessed to have the quality and the breadth that this museum brings to us and the education that it brings to our community. Very impressive. As the late Holocaust survivor and volunteer Lizelle Schick told students, Hitler took away all of our worldly belongings, but the one thing nobody can ever take away from you is your education. I want to thank Senator Boyd, my fellow legislators, and Governor DeSantis, Speaker Sprowls, for their support in securing this funding. It's truly an honor to help the Holocaust Museum pursue their mission of education and wiping out hatred and racism. Thank you all. And now the best part. This is why we're here.
We're hearing from local Jewish organizations after a group of neo-Nazis rallied around the Tampa Convention Center this weekend. The group held signs with swastikas and anti-Semitic messages. But members of the Jewish community tell Tampa Bay Now News at 10's Casey Albritton how they plan to combat messages of hate.
Several Jewish organization leaders say seeing Nazi flags in the Tampa Bay area is unacceptable, and they say the key to overcoming this hate is through education.
My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, so it's to say it's personal is probably an incredible understatement. You know, to see a swastika flying in Tampa Bay is it's just a direct gut punch.
My grandfather fought in the Second World War. He marched across Europe and fought with the Americans against the Nazis. That was supposed to be the past. It should not be the present.
Anti-Semitic signs surrounded the Tampa Convention Center on Saturday with images of swastikas and neo-Nazi symbols.
It's visceral for really, at a minimum, any Jew, but really any civilized person. But I think it's particularly painful when, you know, members of your family were slaughtered by the people who were represented by that symbol.
The rally happened as a convention of young conservative activists met inside the center.
It was a harsh experience for everybody. I think some people experienced it worse than others.
Anti-Semitism incidences, both nationally and Florida, have been rising very significantly in the last few years.
Just last week, families in Manatee County found anti-Semitic flyers in their driveways. Now Jewish groups are trying to spread this message.
No one should be hating anyone. There is no need for hate in this country.
They're promoting unity and education.
Support the Jewish community. You know, I can't be the only Jewish person who exists in Tampa Bay.
Contact the museum, come visit, seek our resources. If you're a parent, tell your children's teachers that you want our resources in your schools. These are life lessons.
In St. Petersburg, Casey Albritton, Tampa Bay Now News at 10.
So I have the great honor of introducing our speaker this evening, Joshua M. Green. We do have his book for sale available over there, and he'll be happy to sign it, I do believe, after we're completed. Joshua Green is a renowned Holocaust scholar and filmmaker whose biographies have sold more than 500,000 copies worldwide. He has spoken at the Pentagon and the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. His documentaries on the history of the Holocaust have aired on PBS and Discovery, and he has appeared on national media outlets from NPR's Fresh Air to Fox News to CNN and more. So I hope you all will give a warm welcome to Joshua Green.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Circumstances of life have positioned me as a chronicler of other people's stories. And the farther we move away from the events of history, the more those stories become important. Survivor testimony is arguably the most effective way of going inside the experience of something that we who were not there would otherwise not understand at all. This particular story was a book that I never intended to write. I had done quite a number of survivor memoirs and biographies, and I thought I was done. I was walking around the house, and my wife saw me and looked and said, "You've got to find something else to write about." I do think I was suffering from a touch of clinical depression. And then the phone rang, and this volcanic voice at the other end of the line said, "You're the one." And I kind of did a double take. I said, like Neo in the Matrix? I mean, what does that mean? He said, "No, you're the one who's going to write my father's story. I've read your books, and I like your writing." It was the son of the subject of this evening's program. Ivan Wilzig learned from his late father the art of speaking at high intensity, and also never taking no for an answer. So I tried to dissuade him. It didn't work, and here we are. My thanks to the staff of the museum for inviting me down here. I want to start by giving you a summary of the story, so we're all sharing the same information. I think you'll find this a different kind of survivor story. The bulk of the book is not about the sad years of life in Europe. The bulk of the book is what Siggy Wilzig accomplished after coming to America. And there's a rather controversial area of psychology called post-traumatic growth, which says that from the most dark and trying of circumstances, sometimes individuals are able to discover resources they never knew they had. A renewed desire for life, a will to move past the darkness, an ability to do things they didn't think themselves capable of doing. I think Siggy Wilzig embodies that. And the more I learned about him, the more I said, you know what, this is a story worth telling. For the past 80 years, there's this tragic narrative that has been allowed to dominate much of the Holocaust discourse that describes Jews as having allowed themselves to be led to the slaughter like sheep. Not only is that historically inaccurate, it's also morally and ethically reprehensible. Siggy's story gives the lie to that misimpression. So let me start there, and then we can get into a discussion. And I do love the discussion part of these evenings. I think I've done this talk about 85 times now around the country. It's good news for the sales of the book. It's very bad news for my relationship with my wife. But for me, the best part is the conversation afterwards, because I learn a lot hearing the kinds of questions that people. Krojanka is a small town in West Prussia, just approaching what was known as the Polish Corridor. It was a strip of land that was carved out after World War I. And Siggy, born in 1921, lived not an impoverished life, but a very modest life there. And he was short of stature, never grew taller than 5 foot 5.5 inches short. As you might have seen from that opening slide, he loved coiffing his hair, very tall, and he wore platform shoes just to kind of bring himself up to a little bit of a par with everybody else. But as a kid, he was always running away from the non-Jews who were cursing at him and telling him to go back to Palestine. He would tell them, and you go back to Rome. And then he'd run. Decided that he didn't really like hanging around with kids. He learned more hanging around with the adults. He would watch them play cards. He would see how they made their decisions. He'd watch business transactions. So even as a kid, he was honing these kinds of survival skills that we'll hear more about in a moment. His family fled when the anti-Semitism got to be too strong in Krianka. 1935, they arrived in Berlin. The schools were soon closed to Jews. And in 1943, I think I said that he was born in 21. Math's not my strong suit. He was 16 years old. 43? No, he'd been 12 years old. 12 years old. Okay. He was put to work in a German munitions family. And shortly thereafter, along with the other Jews of Berlin, he and his family were deported to concentration camp Auschwitz. On their arrival in Auschwitz, Siggy had the terrible experience of seeing his mother and other family members sent directly to the gas chamber. He lied to the guards that he was not 18 years old. This was in 43, so I think the math is right. He was only 16 years old. He said he was 18 years old, not knowing that anyone under the age of 18 was going to be sent to the gas chamber. So he lived the rest of his life always wondering, where did that impulse come from to lie to these guards? He went to his grave not knowing where that idea, how that idea came to mind. He also lied by telling them that he was a master tool maker, which he was not. And whatever the guards needed, he invented himself and became that. He had this wonderful ability to invent tall tales and in a moment transformed himself into whatever was needed. He heard two guards in the camp talking about how they needed bricklayers. He walked over, whipped off his cap and said, 3 years as a master bricklayer back in Berlin. Knew nothing about brick. Later he said, I know about as much about bricklaying as you do about belly dancing. But he learned watching the other bricklayers. And then he started teaching them. So these kinds of very quick study, you might say. He heard them say they needed a doctor's assistant in the prisoner hospital. Oh, I've had years of training. He said, I don't even like seeing a chicken killed, let alone what I saw going on inside these hospitals. Anyway, you get an idea of the kind of volcanic personality that Siggy Wilzig was. The new arrivals coming off the train from Berlin with Siggy, many of them did not speak German. So the guard in his barrack would say, Mützen off, Mützen on, take your cap off, put it back on. They didn't know what he was asking. So for insubordination and for failing to follow orders, they were beaten to death. Siggy saluted the guard and said, Jawohl, Herr Kommandant, elevating the guard to the top position of the camp. Very smart idea. He was only one of 600 people to survive that transport. There were 3,800 people on his train. Most people are unaware, students at least in the schools I talked to, are unaware that between 1933, when the Nazis opened the first concentration camp, Dachau, and 1945, there were more than 40,000 concentration camps established. I don't know if you're aware of that. Not all, they're called collectively concentration camps, but they're not all technically concentration camps. Some were labor camps, some were prisoner of war camps, transit centers, killing centers. Auschwitz, of course, was the largest, with nearly 10,000 acres of land, as you can see here. So to stay alive, he invented all these skills. And by the way, I try as far as possible to avoid photographs of atrocities, since I do work with young people a lot of the time. I'm concerned about the effect of premature exposure to images of horror. So when I can, I will use prisoner artwork. And as far as possible, I will always give the name of the artist, and if I can find a photograph of the artist, I'll do that as well. So here you're seeing a representation of what it was like to be a bricklayer in Auschwitz. This is a picture of, that's Siggy's father, Isidore. They were in the camp for about 3 weeks when Siggy was working in the prisoner hospital, and the guards had him distributing food. Now, what he did not know is this barrel of potatoes had been laced with poison. And what they were doing was a triage. They were trying to get rid of all the prisoners who probably weren't going to recover anyway, so that those who were not quite as sick could be brought in, whatever problem they had could be cured, and they could be sent back out to work. In the hospital, he found his father. He had lost his father on arrival at the loading platform. And without knowing what he was doing, he served his father some of these potatoes along with the other prisoners in the hospital. About 3 weeks before he passed away, Siggy was being interviewed by a film crew from the Shoah Foundation and admitted for the first time something that he had not even told his family. He said, "I think I helped kill my father." These were the kind of memories he lived with. And what's I think you'll find extraordinary in this story is not how he just lived with these stories, but how he was able to manage the horror, manage the nightmares, and take that energy and put it to use building what was one of the great post-war business sagas. So we'll get to that in a moment. These, again, as close as I could find to a picture of that barrel of poisoned potatoes. Siggy's father and mother. His mother was the one who kept him kosher, made sure that he grew up respecting kosher. And when there was no food to eat, they would eat some vegetable that they had. I'm trying to remember what it was, beets or something. And that's all they ate for weeks at a time. That's all they could find. Right. On one particular day, there was a violent drunkard guard who yelled at the other prisoners in Siggy's work detail. Who can sing? Who among you can sing? And nobody was in any mood to sing, obviously, but Siggy calculated that if he disobeyed the guard, if someone didn't step up and start singing, he would kill them for disobeying. So he stood up, and there was a popular song at the time, "Roll Out the Barrels." So he's stepping back and forth and singing the song. The guard's kind of appreciating this and tapping his foot. At the end, he walks over and hands Siggy a piece of bread. A piece of bread, he said, was like a sirloin steak. And he said, but what if he didn't like my singing? So in the camps, you didn't know what would save your life and what would kill you. And this is what Holocaust scholar Lawrence Langer, a dear friend and someone who's been here several times, refers to as choiceless choice. There were no good choices in the camps. There were choices between bad and worse. So just some scenes of a little bit of food that prisoners were allowed to have. In Auschwitz, the daily calorie count was about 700 for the prisoners there, which is starvation level. And an extra piece of bread could save your life. It was around this time that Siggy met this young fellow on, I guess it'd be to your right. Larry Nartell had a job in the Canada warehouses. Now in Auschwitz, when the prisoners arrived at the train station, their luggage was confiscated and sent to these warehouses where prisoners were put to work rifling through everything, finding any medicines, money, silver, gold, jewelry, whatever kinds of valuables there might have been in these garments, and they were put into crates, nailed shut, and sent off to the German headquarters in Berlin. If you had a job in these Canada warehouses, you had an opportunity on occasion to appropriate some of what you might find there, and that could also save your life because you could take that and then barter for an extra piece of food. And in Siggy's case, he would sometimes barter for a little sliver of soap. In the camps, you didn't just die from a German bullet or from starvation. You would die from the atrophying of the human body. And so staying clean was often also a case of life and death. Larry got Siggy a job in the warehouses, and Siggy never forgot that and had an opportunity to return the favor in January of 1945, when the sounds of the Russian army were coming closer and closer from the east, and the administrators of Auschwitz realized that the time had come to drive remaining prisoners, those who could still walk, into camps deeper inside Germany. So in January of 1945, Siggy was lined up with others from Auschwitz and sent on what later came to be known as the Death March. Larry couldn't go on. He was too weak. And if you couldn't walk, you would be shot to death and left in the snow to die. So rather than see his friend die, Siggy bent down and said, get on. Larry climbed on his back, and as best he could, Siggy marched forward with Larry on his back. I have to remember, at this point, they're weighing 80, 85 pounds, no strength whatsoever. This story blew me away. Siggy described for the Shoah Foundation that in the snow, his shoes had begun to deteriorate, and the laces in particular just completely dissolved in the snow and in the rain. And the shoe began to slide up and down on his foot. Now, if that happened, these were shoes made of wood, like Hollander shoes. If your foot got a splinter, the body didn't have any resources to fight infection, so you would die. He's sitting there in the snow. The guards have gone to sleep in a warm barn nearby. The prisoners are down for the night in the snow. He's looking around saying, what have I got? I've got nothing. He reaches into his pocket. Well, he did have one thing. He had a spoon that he was able to keep with him from Auschwitz. The edge of the spoon had been sharpened down a little bit. You couldn't have a knife in Auschwitz. But if you took a spoon, you could sharpen the edge and use that to cut things. Not far away, he saw a small birch tree, a little sapling. And so when the guards weren't looking, he crawled over, used the edge of his spoon to score strips of bark from the tree, warmed them up between his palms, braided them together, and very carefully wrapped them around his shoes. Stood, took some tentative steps, and sure enough, the strips of bark held. And he would say, my life was saved by a little strip of bark. And he said, where these ideas come from, only the Almighty knows. They arrive in concentration camp Mauthausen, and a few weeks later, when the American Army, the Liberation Army, arrives, Siggy is all skin and bones, and he and Larry recover in a Red Cross hospital. And after they've had some strength back, they volunteered to work for the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, or the CIC as it was known. This was the same agency that Simon Wiesenthal worked for. This was an intelligence and evidence gathering agency in preparation for the war crimes trials. During his time, about a year or year and a half working for the CIC, Siggy tells the following story. He said, I took my first plane ride, and it was a cold, rainy day, a cloudy day. And he said this was significant because in the camps, people were always talking about, is there a God? Is there still a God? Some people would say, well, there used to be, but he's kind of abandoned us now. Others say, no, there was never a God. Someone else would say, he's there, but he doesn't care anymore. All kinds of theories. Siggy, who was a very devout Jew, never lost his faith, but it was severely challenged, shall we say, in concentration camps. He said, that day that I went up in that plane and the plane lifted up over the clouds, on the other side of the clouds, it was a beautiful, bright, sunshiny day, and it was a beautiful sun. And a blue sky. And he said, in that moment, my faith was confirmed, and it was God speaking to me. And it was God saying, listen, don't give in to the despair. Whatever you do, don't give in to the despair. Sometimes a dark cloud like Hitler comes between us, but I'm still here. That's the kind of Jew that Siggy Wilczek was. So he comes to America in December of 1947, coldest winter in 50 years. The snow was piled up to the third floor of buildings in the city. 21-year-old Siggy Wilczek arrives in New York. He disembarks. Hayes has reserved rooms for arriving survivors at a place called Hotel Marseille on 103rd Street and Broadway. It used to be a beautiful building. That was a little run down. He arrives at the hotel, and on that first day, he looks out from his window. Can I read this? I'm so proud of what I wrote. If I can find it quickly, just give you a little bit of an idea of what his life was like arriving in New York. What now, he wondered. He's looking out the window onto the snow on the streets below. See, what now, he wondered. He had nothing, no resources, no credentials. He spoke with a thick German accent, had only a grade school education, stood 5 feet, 5 1/2 inches short, and years of torture and starvation was still fresh in his mind. Yet here he was, still breathing, staring out the window at snow-covered streets in New York. By comparison with the past, everything here was paradise. The bus ride to Harlem from Ellis Island, paradise. The neighborhood grocery stores, high-rise apartment buildings, hotels crowded with cockroaches scurrying across the hardwood floor, the heavy snowfall outside his window, the $200 in his pocket, which was his vast fortune, and soon would disappear if he didn't find work. It was all paradise. On the streets below the window, weary pedestrians fought driving winds and 6-foot-high drifts, evoking for Siggy harsh memories of other blinding storms, when starving men and women trudged forward on death marches wearing nothing more than thin prisoner uniforms. Traffic in the New York streets snarled, and drivers honked their horns, impatient to get wherever they were going. Even to a 21-year-old newcomer like Siggy, it was clear that Americans, who had never known the inside of a concentration camp, were alive in every sense, moving purposely forward toward some vision of tomorrow. He liked that, and he would do that too. He would grasp opportunities and not allow the darkness of the past to rob him of a bright future. In that seminal moment of his new life, Siggy made 3 promises to himself. First, he would never go hungry again. Second, he would marry a Jewish woman, have Jewish children, and help rebuild the Jewish people. And third, he would preserve Holocaust memory and speak up whenever he witnessed injustice. He had no illusions about these vows. He knew better than to think he could change the world. Anti-Semitism would never go away, and Jews would always be persecuted. That was just business as usual. Still, the Almighty had saved him, and now his job was to grab whatever scraps remained from the rubble of his life and cobble them back together in an edifice of yet to be determined size and shape. So there's Hotel Marseille, where Siggy stayed when he arrived here. This is his passport photo. So this guy, just to kind of give away the shop, as they say, by the time he was done, he had built an oil and banking empire with assets of more than $2 billion. That's with a B. His first job in America, shoveling snow. Someone paid him $2 a day to shovel snow in front of his store. By day 2, Siggy had found some kids in the neighborhood willing to do it for $1. So he's 21 years old. He's just arrived. He's already a big business mogul here, right? Then he graduated to selling ties, neckties. And from there, he gained some commissions from that. Meanwhile, this is the love story part. There's always a love story. Meanwhile, in Newark, New Jersey, a fruit and vegetable vendor, who also served as the local matchmaker, met a young college student, one of his customers named Naomi Sisselman. And he asked her, he said, "You look like a colored male. You look like a marriageable young lady. Do you mind if I give your name and phone number to one of my other customers? He's a nice guy, just arrived from Europe." "Is he Jewish?" she asked. "Yeah, he's Jewish." "Oh, why not? My parents would be fine with that." They hated the idea. Their daughter, from a distinguished Jewish family, dating an Auschwitz survivor, that was not exactly a status symbol in 1946. Anyway, he gave him the number. As you can tell, this was a full-service fruit and vegetable business. Siggy, who had a wicked sense of humor, used to say that I didn't have a when he came to the first date with Naomi, he says, "I don't own a $5,000 car, so I came to pick you up in a $40,000 bus." And they were married. Actually, technically, they eloped. They didn't marry, they eloped. Because it's the only way her parents, they didn't allow it to happen. They got used to him after a while because he became fabulously successful. But first, an interim business in furniture. And it took him only a few weeks to triple the sales in this business. And what did he do? He took the little bit of commissions that he would earn and he bought stock. He taught himself to read the stock market pages in the newspaper. He saw this sleepy little company in Texas called Wilshire Oil and Gas. He bought a few shares. And then he bought a few more shares. And then he convinced all of his friends and neighbors to come in with him. And eventually he took over the company. Now he knew nothing. He'd never been to business school, knew nothing about oil and gas. But his daughter, who turned out to be his successor as head of Wilshire Oil and Gas, they described for me his method. His method was that he would read people's faces. The way you build an oil and gas company is what's called spudding. You dig an experimental hole, and if you can extract something from the ground, it looks like the composition of the soil is such that this looks good. Then you start investing some money. And Siggy, who knew nothing about any of this stuff, would look at the faces of his land surveyors. And if they were completely convinced, they would say, "Mr. Wilsey, this one right here, this is it. He would back them. And more often than not, it was the right way to go. And he built Wilshire Oil and Gas to the point where it was becoming so successful that he needed more cash flow. These extraction businesses take a long time before they generate any profits. So the government allows for certain tax incentives, tax benefits, if you will. And one is that you can upstream. It's called upstreaming. If a company owns a bank, like Wilshire Oil, then they can take monies that the bank would otherwise pay Uncle Sam, taxable money, and they can pay it to their parent company to pay off the expenses for growing that business. Things have changed since then, but in the 1960s, when Siggy was building his company, this is how he did it. So he went looking. He needed cash flow. A business advisor said to him, "Well, banks have a lot of money. Why don't you go find a bank?" So he did. And he did the same thing with Trust Company of New Jersey Bank that he had done with Wilshire Oil. A few stock shares here, a few shares there, another takeover, and now he's got these, he call it a cash cow. The bank was fueling the growth of the oil and gas company. Here you can see one of 100 openings of a new branch of Trust Company of New Jersey. All right, a Siggy story. I interviewed 100 people for this. It's not an exaggeration, 100 people, more or less. Everyone had a Siggy story. I could write a sequel to this book just based on the Siggy stories that people had to tell me. He was little, but one person said he sucked the air out of the room. He was such a dynamic personality that you couldn't blink. He had, you see the little gold watch fob? So a potential customer would come in and maybe say, "Oh, Mr. Wilczek, I admire that. What is that hanging from your vest?" You say, "Oh, that? Oh, that's my Phi Beta Kappa key. I got that when I went to Oxford." Oh, wait, I didn't. No, first I went to Harvard, then I graduated and I transferred to Oxford, and that's when I got. And really, you went to Harvard? Well, can you write a letter of recommendation for my son? He says schmuck. That was his favorite word, by the way. Everybody was a schmuck. Everybody. No exceptions. Everybody's a schmuck, mainly because they didn't know as much as he did. If they would just do what he told them, they would make money. So I said schmuck. There was no higher education in Auschwitz. You were in Auschwitz. Okay, now there's a connection. Other bank presidents, how would they do business? On a golf course. You go and you schmooze with people from your own social level. Siggy was a nobody. So he would have to create these moments, these points of entry with people, and he would do it by telling those outrageous stories. And one woman walked into the bank and he said, "Oh, madam, you're so beautiful." And he starts primping her hair. You know, it's a stranger. He's primping her hair. "What are you doing?" And he says, "Madam, I own a chain of hair salons. You're already very beautiful, but I can make you even more beautiful." And he's, like Vidal Sassoon at work here, And the woman says, "Oh, really? Can I get an appointment?" "Yeah, an appointment? We have no openings for 6 months." And he would storm away. An hour later, she had given him all her money for investments, for savings, you name it. And that's how, one customer at a time, that's how Siggy built the trust company of New Jersey. Here he is in front of the bank. And now, come along the 1970s, runaway inflation. Nixon says, we're going to clamp down on these parent companies, these non-banking companies that own banks, because this is very dangerous. It's bad for the country. You've got all this inflation. And 400 parent companies acquiesce, and they separate. They sell their bank holding. The one holdout, Wilshire Oil and Gas. The one holdout, Paul Volcker, new chairman of the Fed, and his cronies come in and they say, Mr. Wilczek, 399 other companies have complied with our order to divest. You're the only one who has not done so. When are you going to do it? He had a device. This is Siggy's device. He would take off, I'm not going to do it, a little chilly. Take off his jacket. He'd roll up the sleeve. And he'd show them his Auschwitz number. And he would say, the last person who tried to intimidate me was Hitler. He didn't succeed. And neither will you. And he'd put his jacket on, walk out, and beat them at their own game. That's what I think the technical word is chutzpah. But eventually he was forced to do so. He was forced to divest his two companies. You'll have to read the book to understand how it was that he lost the battle but won the war. I won't get into that right now. But just to give you an idea, Forbes magazine did a profile of Siggy, and they summed it up like this. What's the Fed when you've just stared down the Gestapo? That was the final line in this profile. So here we're coming to the end of this quick overview of the life of Siggy Wilczek. The one place he would go on vacation was Miami. And it wasn't Fontainebleau. It was, what was the other hotel? It was the, what was it? Eden Rock? No, not Eden Rock. I'm drawing a blank. I forgot. It'll come to me. As soon as I leave, I'll remember. It was a kosher hotel, and he would go there with his family. And this one night, at the table next to him in the dining hall was Elie Wiesel and his wife. So the two strike up a conversation, and they realize that they have a lot in common. They both survived Auschwitz. They both lost their parents in Auschwitz. They both bemoaned the rise of anti-Semitism that was going on. So and it was around this time that the president, Carter, it was now Carter, asked Elie Wiesel, can you please help us build a museum to the Holocaust on the Mall in Washington? Elie Wiesel, who's done more for the Jewish people and for Holocaust memory than anyone we could think of, knew nothing about business, asks Siggy, please come and help me. So Siggy becomes a founding member of the museum council, helps establish the museum, gets all of his friends in business to give big dollars. The museum opens. This was a very important moment for Siggy. And along with his appointment to the council came an invitation to dine at the White House. Siggy Wilzig, who arrives in America at age 21 with $200 and no contacts, no education, no one backing him, is having dinner with the president and his wife in the White House. I found that to be a very happy moment. Here's the end of the story. Siggy is diagnosed with multiple myeloma, incurable blood cancer. And the one thing he has not done, he's accomplished so much, supported so many educational programs, the first survivor to speak at West Point and so on. He hasn't recorded his own stories. He had always wanted to do a book, but he always held back because he didn't want his memories sitting on the shelf until some scholar happened to come along and find them. But it was the clock is ticking here. He's dying. So his son Ivan, whom you see in the middle, reads. Ivan has a home out on Long Island in the Hamptons. And he reads that Steven Spielberg's going to a fundraiser the next week on Long Island. So he gets a ticket for himself and his brother Alan on the left. And at the fundraiser, he walks right up to Mr. Spielberg and says, you know, your group wanted to interview my father before, but for business reasons, he was unable to accept. Now he's dying. You must interview him. Spielberg says, I'm sorry, we've stopped our formal part of the Shoah Foundation interviews. Now we're just doing cataloging. Against Ivan would not take no for an answer. He says, you must make an exception. He is the most eloquent survivor you will ever meet. He's good friends with your friend, Elie Wiesel. Your sister, Nancy, is married to the son of my father's rabbi. I mean, everything, he planned this very, very carefully. So Spielberg says, all right, give me your card. Sometimes we can make an exception. A few weeks later, his crew shows up at Siggy's apartment on Palisades in New Jersey. And I'm going to show a film now. You're going to get to hear Siggy describe himself in his own words. Now, bear in mind, my partner and I edited this down from about 30 hours. It was one of the longest testimonies in the entire catalog of the Shoah Foundation archive. He was already under the influence of very heavy cancer medications, so you'll see him like dry mouth, he'll be licking his lips a lot and so on. But I wanted you to hear Siggy describing something about himself in his own terms. Okay, this will be about, I think, 12 minutes, and then we'll come back and chat for a while.
The longer I live, the more I remember. I'm trying to get away from the past, but it isn't possible. I am not liberated yet. I live in Auschwitz every day.
I was born in 26 in Koyanke. It was West Prussia, about 155 miles northeast of Berlin. 4,500 people, and I would think there were about 1,500 Jews. My mother's name was Sophie, and my father's name was Isidore. My mother was an Orthodox woman. My father made a little living. He bought hides with 2 horses and a wagon. In 35, we left everything, and the next morning we were in Berlin. There was an immediate change when Hitler came to power. You had already the sons joining the Nazi party. Well, I was beaten up regularly. Kristallnacht, I was 12 years old. As a child, and you see synagogues burn, Jewish homes go up in flames, and the police not doing anything. It was like the end of the world. It was forced labor run by the army. It used to make lamps before the war, and I worked on a lathe. I was 14 and a half years old, and I worked 72 hours. How much more can you do? They called it evacuation. That was the word. For instance, I was picked up in the middle of the night, 2:30, 3 o'clock, from this Lampenweber, from this forced labor that I did. When the trains pulled up, I looked out of the window. I know we were going east. But going east didn't mean Auschwitz. We didn't know there was an Auschwitz. So we arrived the night of March 3rd, bitter cold. I saw flames coming out only about 150 feet away from the train. So I thought it was a brick factory. I didn't know that people would be burned and gassed. To have been born as a Jew in Germany, to get beaten, to get hard labor, all of that. But the gas chambers, no. That you didn't expect. Where 10,000 people could be gassed in one night. The smell, that is a little bit hard to describe because there is no other smell like this. Have you ever seen people being burned? Have you ever smelled them? Neither did I. You see in my arm what the Nazis did. 104, 732. The little triangle, only for Jews. The selection was really a dastardly, terrible situation. My mother was immediately murdered in the gas chamber. My father was badly beaten, and my father died in front of me. The Auschwitz one was the main camp. The main camp are brick buildings, block by block. And 10 was the experimental, where the women went in, and the women didn't come out. Please do not ask me what kind of experiment. I think the Germans had a word, unmenschlich, unhuman. How did I find a way to live? If you didn't find out what I found out, you would be dead. There was no other way. I looked for every opening that they could possibly use someone like me, and I overheard something about bricklayers. I became an instant bricklayer. I did it for about 6 months. They needed someone in the laundry. I never worked in the laundry in my life, but I got away with 3-4 months. How do you survive 2 years of Auschwitz? It was not my education, which I didn't have any. It was my brain, which I didn't have much. It was the hand of God. The Death March began on the 17th of January. We left Auschwitz and we started to march 150, 160 miles. It was a combination of open cattle cars and walking. It was winter time. We huddled together. The first stop was Gleiwitz, a major center for coal and for metal. When the doors opened, a sight that I will never forget. We were sent to Vienna, to Melk and to Steyr. Our marching ended in Mauthausen. And when we were taken into the small shower room, we actually felt you would be gassed when you hear the clicking of the metal. That's something that stays with you forever. Somebody pointed on top of a hill a uniform I'd never seen, the American khaki uniform. They broke down the gates. That's where I was liberated. I had fever and sickness and everything else. I weighed 82 pounds. I left Europe November 29th, 47, and arrived in America December 12th, 47. What kind of work did I do first when I came to this country? Next, I was the original glue sniffer, putting glue on the back of leather bags for $28 a week. Oh, next I became an experienced leather goods salesman. My mind was made up that I can sell better than anybody else. Naomi Sisselman. We got married March 1454 in the Little Hungary on Houston Street. The whole dinner was $12.95, including the plaster flower. In 6 or 7 weeks, I went from salesman to general manager. I ran the business and doubled it. What did I do next? I acquired control of Wilshire Oil Company of Texas, a little oil company. I bought it piece by piece by piece by piece. The Rothschild in me went to the bank, the Trust Company of New Jersey, a 100-year-old institution. I was only the second Jew to become a president of a bank. The Jews were not bankers. Maybe there were a couple of savings and loans, but not of major size. Commercial banking particularly was a fiercely anti-Semitic business. They think because I'm a refugee and because I never went to school, I didn't even graduate public school, that how the hell do I become a president of a bank? I did it anyhow. I'm the president of a $4 billion bank. I was born to be president. If there's an organization that has anything to do with the Holocaust, I address their organizations, I give money, and I insist that my children go. See, the people that speak about it, and we're not there, they have to take the best from books, from studying, from movies, from theater. But when you were there, at a young age, then it stays with you.
When I see what I went through and hundreds of thousands of others that are not here to tell you, so I speak for them. I have that right. I have that obligation to speak for them because we're a dying breed and too many people are telling you there was no Holocaust. Never can anyone describe the scene. If you hear it 1,000 times, the chances are you are not capable of believing it.
What kinds of nightmares do you have?
Very bad. Can't even talk about. It's something that is there. You are in Auschwitz every day. I'm going to tell you something that I don't think I ever said. As terrible as it sounds, I don't think I could live without the nightmares. It gives me the very ultra realistic difference between life and death. It shows me what life is now, particularly as a Jew, and that I didn't give it up, what I am. I wouldn't want to be anything else. If I would have to go through, God forbid, the same thing, I would go through the same thing as a Jew.
And you said the message for your, or the inspiration for your book was to share the experience of the Holocaust with today's generation, to keep it alive, that message. So the question occurs to me, what is their message? What is their message relative to the state of Israel today?
By their message, who are you referring to?
The Holocaust survivors, the Holocaust victims.
Okay. The question is, what is the statement by survivors with respect to the state of Israel, if I understand you correctly?
It's a message. What is their message?
The message. Well, I was discussing with some of our friends from the museum here that there are different editorial perspectives, you might say, curatorial perspectives. When you visit the museum in Washington, you'll get the Allied point of view. The good guys won. How many of you have been to the Washington Museum? Do you remember? Wonderful. The exhibit starts from the top floor. You take the elevator up. Do you remember what the first thing is when you walk out of the elevator? It's that statue of the American GI holding the victim of the camp. I don't know if it's still there now, but it was when the museum first opened. What's the message? What? We did it. You know, the Allies did it. If you go to Yad Vashem, it's not at all the message you're going to get. In Yad Vashem, the message is, it is not about the Allies. It is about us Jews. This is what happened to us when we did not have our own state, when we did not have our own army. And at the end of the exhibit, you walk out onto this amazing veranda overlooking a nation in dramatic growth and flourishing. The New York Holocaust Museum, where I come from, is about life prior to the Holocaust. So each museum has a particular perspective. And if you speak with survivors, you know, if I've learned anything about the Holocaust, it's that you can't generalize. You have to particularize. There is this small group and there's this small group. And some survivors will say, never again means never again to be unprepared, without arms, without... I just finished a book for Scholastic on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and a woman named Vlad Kamid. It's all about getting weapons. We need the weapons. Others, if you go to the ultra-Orthodox community, they have a very different idea of what a war hero is. For them, heroism is never abandoning your belief or your practices, even in a concentration camp. So you have as many perspectives as there are individuals. And I don't think it's our position to say this one is right and that one's not right. I think our position is to understand that we're a very diverse people with a love of education, with a love of history, with a love of culture, and a love of learning how to do better next time. That's about as best an answer I can give you just now. Yes, sir.
Did you have a chance to interview the children?
I'm sorry?
Did you have a chance to interview his children?
Oh, yes. Siggy's children. Yeah, sure.
What did you think of them? What was their perspective? Did they show similar traits as their dad?
You know, here we can relate to certain studies that have been done about second generations and even beyond that. There's a field of study called epigenetics, which talks about the transmission of traumatic memory over the generations. And Siggy's children will, I don't think I'm saying anything that they would be upset with me for saying. They live with having grown up with their father's memories. And they also grew up, I don't know if it's possible to understand what it's like to be the child of a survivor.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well then you do understand. There's this almost impossible expectation. You're a miracle child. We survived for you so that we could bring you into the world. And again, I don't want to generalize that every family is like this. There are families that talk about their experiences. There are other families that don't. But in the case of Siggy's children, they've done well, and they are admirable supporters of the Jewish community and practitioners of Judaism. But they also live with having grown up with, as you can see, an awfully dynamic man who wouldn't take no for an answer from anyone, including his own children. Yes, young man.
What was your personal inspiration to begin writing about the Holocaust?
What was my inspiration for writing about the Holocaust? Okay, that's one of 3 questions I hope no one's ever going to ask me when I get into it. That's okay, you're entitled to an answer. In my family, I'm considered the spiritual one. You know, I practice yoga, and I'm vegan, and I chant mantras, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm called upon to teach sometimes in yoga studios. And for many years, people would come up to me. They'd say, hey, you know, Yogi, my nickname is Yogi. Hey, Yogi, you're supposed to be the spiritual guy. How do you put your vision of the world together with what happened in Europe 80 years ago? I mean, how do you make that fit? And I didn't have a very good answer. I didn't know what to tell them. You know, if you believe in a benign, beneficent, supreme being, how do you reconcile the murder of 1.5 million children? I mean, how do you do that? So when an opportunity came along to work with the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies at Yale University, I grabbed it because I wanted to understand more about this period. I'm not Solomon. I can't give you all the answers. What I can tell you is that I've developed a short form answer to your question, which is when we humans are sacred beings, we're sparks of God. When we turn away from our own true nature, we can fall terribly far. When we turn toward our true nature, we can soar very, very high. Chew on that one for a while.
Yeah.
Other questions? Comments? Yes, sir.
How do you feel about the rise of anti-Semitism in the last couple of years in the United States? And Florida in particular has a lot of issues with it. Are you discouraged by that?
Suicidal, maybe.
Angry, discouraged by it.
Look, I don't think that's ever going to change. I mean, our job is to take whatever opportunities come before us and make the most of them. Our job is to not stand by and just let things happen. I think that's the message that you were always giving to school groups who come to visit here. That's as true for the adults as it is for the children. We have to speak up. I don't know. I don't know how we've gotten to this point. You know, I'm a New Yorker. I remember going to school with kids, Republicans, conservatives, all over the place. You know, we weren't all Jews in my school. We would go to picnics together, you know, and the grown-ups would be having conversations. You can have differences of opinion, but there wasn't the animosity that we're seeing today. There wasn't the kind of cutthroat bitterness that's going on. And I don't understand it. I can't claim to understand it. I don't know. And I will tell you honestly, when I don't know something, I don't know how that's happened. And I feel terrible about it. You know, and so vote, get out and vote, and do what you can. I come here because I try to do my little piece. That's not a very good answer, but it was a good question. Yes, any other thoughts or ideas? Yes, ma'am.
So I know you've written a number of Holocaust survivor stories, right? Is there any, do you ever get together with a group of other people who have written them or done their self-stories? I used to work for a printing company, did a lot of self-publishing for the Holocaust Museum people in Illinois.
Right.
Is there a group of people who get together?
Well, there are many. Yes, there are many groups. I think we saw representatives of the local 2G and 3G organizations here. Am I correct about that? There's a 2G and 3G organization in New York where you know, I've attended several of their gatherings, and it's wonderful. These are the children and the grandchildren and now great-grandchildren who are learning their grandparents or great-grandparents' stories and learning how to tell those stories. There's a way to tell a good story. I've tried a number of ways to get to where I was able to tell you a story this evening that I hope you found engaging and interesting. There's a way to tell a story. You know, you try to connect with the audience, you know where the thing, you know, attention's flagging, so you got to bring it back and so on. That's true, even telling the stories of survivors. Look, here's the bottom line. We have to be vigilant about being truthful as far as possible to history. The risk that we're running is seeing the Holocaust misappropriated, the stories of the Holocaust misappropriated for entertainment purposes, creative purposes, and so on. Can I assume that everyone here has seen Schindler's List? Okay. You may recall the final scene in Schindler's List, when black and white turned to glorious color, and the survivors of the camps linked arms and walked over the hillside singing Israeli folk songs. Well, that never happened. That's not the Holocaust. That's not history. That's Hollywood. Right? Thank God there is a Steven Spielberg, but he can't help being a storyteller. And he wanted people to be able to go home and go to sleep and get up the next day. So you put a kind of a spin on the end of things. How many of you seen Roberto Benigni's Life is Beautiful? All right, does anyone think for a moment that at the end of the war, a young child takes a victory ride on an Allied tank to be reunited with his mother, all their limbs intact, and they live happily ever after? These things don't happen. It's Hollywood. Or Robin Williams' movie Jacob the Liar, or The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. What you have is the Holocaust in service to the storyteller. That I have a problem with. That I have a serious objection to. Because now you're teaching lies. Some may argue, well, isn't it better that people are aware of the Holocaust, however they become aware of it? Personally, I don't think so. You know, if you're taught that the Holocaust was the result of bullying and inflation, you're teaching lies. That was not the cause of the Holocaust. The Holocaust did not occur because people were bullies or they were intolerant of Jews. The Holocaust occurred because people wanted to murder the Jews. They wanted to kill them. They wanted to get rid of the entire Jewish people. We now know that if Hitler had won the war, he wouldn't have stopped with Europe. He had plans for every Jew on the planet. I have a problem trying to teach young children not to bully by using mass murder as your example. I have a problem with that. Now, I'm not saying we should stop, but I'm saying that there's a delicate line here. We have to be careful with it. So more power to the second and third generations for doing what they're doing, as long as the story is being told accurately. I guess, do we have, is that good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and I'm sure that if you have more questions for Mr. Green, he'll gladly answer them because he will be over here to sign books if you already have them or if you want to grab them from Maddie over there. So thank you so much.